Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Nishcast. It's your boy, the Diggly Doodle Dog, Mr. Peptide Panther, here with the wobbliest of the wobbly wildcard. And we are here to deliver another episode of the Nishcast via the Niche Cache, where we just chat through all the notable, relevant, and funkadelic Kiwi sporting bits and bobs of the last week, or whatever the fuck is top of mind in the land of Aotearoa. Prior to this, we recorded a pre-podcast kōrero for our Patreon. So if you do enjoy the Niche Cache and you want to support us, the best way to support us is on Patreon. They'll just support all the lovely content coming from the Niche Cache, and you'll get a bit of extra as well, such as the pre-podcast kōrero, or just always read and listen to the Niche Cache. That's pretty cool as well. We pop up Mondays and Fridays with a little email thingy majig as well, and we're always writing about Kiwi sports, so head over to the website and read about it. Wobbly Wildcard. I have a question. I have two questions. How the fuck are you? And what are you feeling about a bit of Joseph Parker versus Junior Fa? That has been on the radar for a long time now. We've discussed it a few times as well. Seems pretty close to getting underway. So I'm just going to come at you off the top of the dome here. What are your feelings, vibes with this bout? Yeah.
It sounds like it. Well, I mean, we've sort of expected it was going to happen for a while, for like reasons that we have discussed a few times, which is that there just aren't really any other options right now for either of them. It's just the easiest and on the balance of like a sliding scale of easy, not a sliding scale on the not the sliding scales, but the ones that go where you weigh things on each side, those kinds of scales. Where you balance up profitability and competitiveness, this just seems like by far the best option, which it would not have been without like a pandemic. I don't think Joseph Parker would have needed a fight like this. I think he would have had better options. But it works under the current circumstances, and it makes sense, and there's been a lot of haggling as to making it work, so like making it actually happen, which has been a little bit frustrating. So I will have to dig into this over the week when like actual details become a little more prominent and all those kind of things, but it sounds like it's going to happen, So I don't know, I'm excited from a Kiwi sporting perspective. I think I like think a little deeper about how like matchups work later on. I still think Joseph Parker will like have to be an overwhelming favorite just because of his experience and the levels he's fought at. Junior Fa not having come anywhere near close to some of the opponents, like the caliber of opponents that they're at different stages of their career, which is funny to think about because Junior Fa I think is actually older than Joseph Parker. Just went pro a lot later, but yeah, I'm pretty excited. I'd like to see a bit of Kiwi boxing in the spotlight. Would be very nice. It's been a little while.
I think I read yesterday, Sunday or Monday, I read on the New Zealand Herald that this was probably going to go ahead. And there was one writer from the New Zealand Herald. Then today I read it on Stuff, and it was a different writer, two different jokers from the mainstream media. Both of them referred to, I think it was Boxing Rec, and their rankings, like their independent rankings. And it was just, I found it interesting because there is a way where you can slice this as a far more competitive fight. There's a way where you can slice this as a very competitive fight, and there is a way you can slice this as a celebration for Joseph Parker. And in both instances for the mainstream media, they referred to the same rankings, perhaps because they're like an independent overall ranking thing. But also those rankings had Joseph Parker like pretty high, like 9th or 8th in the world overall. and Junior Fa was way back in 31st. When you look at other rankings, and Junior Fa is a top 10 in certain organizations with the WCIA, whatever the alphabet shit is. So I just found that very interesting that two jokers had painted the picture, maybe not intentionally, maybe just through that's the only boxing ranking system that they actually know of and stuff like that. So I just found that interesting that in both outlets, it was portrayed as if Joseph Parker is a raging favorite, and that should come as no surprise to our listeners because I approached this certified from the City Kickboxing perspective where Junior Fa trains. And there was also the story about Joseph Parker's team having a bit of a whinge. There's been a lot of whinging from Team Joseph Parker Wildcard throughout this process, and they were having a bit of a whinge about not being able to get suitable, adequate training partners to New Zealand, as if all rules and regulations should be opened up for Joseph Parker. But I imagine that Junior Fa is training in New Zealand as well, and that Junior Fa would probably enjoy flying in a training sparring partner from another country as well. So I did find that a bit strange as well, just with another set of complaints and whinging from Team Parker.
Yeah, well, some of the negotiations that were played out in public got a bit tiresome from that perspective as well. I mean, I remember we did talk about this a while back, with the different sort of factors involved there. It is a unique one for Parker's team, to where they actually get to be like, and I'm not even talking about Eddie Hearn here, I'm talking more specifically about like David Higgins and Kevin Barry, where they get to be like on the dominant side of things, whereas even when Parker had his world title bout, like he was still not, I don't think he was ever treated in the same way as like he probably should have been. Like a lot of those defenses were overseas and whatever. Maybe that was fair enough because the way he got it was as an interim kind of thing. Andy Ruiz got down the line beaten who was it? Anthony Joshua, like makes a big difference. In hindsight, that wasn't known at the time. Although maybe Andy Ruiz ruined that with his poor defense, the second in the rematch. So I don't know, but I think Parker's immediate associates probably quite enjoyed being able to be like the dominant party in the negotiations for a bit, and also flexing the fact that if push came to shove, they could go overseas and more easily get a similar sort of caliber fight. Would have been more difficult for them, a lot more annoying than fighting in New Zealand. But they had the options through, specifically through Eddie Hearn and Matchroom and all that. So I think they probably enjoyed that a little bit too much. They've always been David Higgins has always been a little bit of a cowboy in particular. He's quite an enjoyable figure for that reason. So I don't know. I looked up the box rec things, and Parker is at 13. Parker's at 12, and Junior Fa's at 31. Which, to be honest, like I'm surprised. Like I would have thought Junior Fa would have been a fair bit lower than that. Like that's ahead of some of the guys immediately below him, are like Filip Hrgovic, Tom Schwartz, Ajit Kabayel, Christian Hammer. Those are Marius Wok. Like these are all relatively known names in the heavyweight boxing scene, and Junior Fa is ranked ahead. Like he hasn't had a major fight to his card, but he has done a fair bit of fighting over the last 3 or 4 years, and he has been working his way up, and he is ranked on at least one of the bouts. So based on that, like I think that if anything, those box rec rankings tell you that it's going to be a more competitive fight than it perhaps appears. Like that's 12 to 31 isn't a massive difference in heavyweight boxing, especially when you consider how like those rankings are gonna there's gonna be a lot of guys in the like above that who are maybe inactive or like and just hold their rankings because they haven't lost, or like those kind of factors all come into play. I mean, if anything, that tells you that that tells me specifically that it's a more competitive fight than perhaps I was expecting. So it's a strange one. We'll see. Only one way to see how that goes, though. They did split as amateurs, which is the point that's always been said is like Junior Farr beat him a couple times when they were amateurs. I think they were 2-2 as amateur boxers, but that was like more than 10 years ago. B, Junior Farr is a couple years older, so if it's like an 18-year-old against a 16-year-old, I think that matters a lot more at that age. It's not something I'm putting any stock in, but I expect that's something you'll hear many, many times over the things. That's the one thing I'm not looking forward to, is seeing how like suddenly the Kiwi media folks on the Telly News and the fellas on the radio and whatever, and some of the newspapers, I think, are the bit, like you mentioned stuff in the Herald. I think those are the two best places to get boxing reckons at this point in the Kiwi media, outside of the niche cash, of course. But I'm not looking forward to how everyone will suddenly be an expert on the matter over the next couple. I don't know. Have they said when the fight's going to be? Is there any like info on that?
No, just later this year, probably in December, depending on all the bullshit, obviously. But
yeah, frisky. Well, I don't know.
Wait, I've got a question. I've got a question with going back to the sparring. You offered a nice little bit of insight there with the rankings and the boxing rec. Would, in your mind, like if Joseph Parker's trying to fly in a sparring partner and he's having whatever difficulties with that, like you would assume that Junior Farr is training in New Zealand, probably Auckland, probably at City Kickboxing. To your mind, Junior Farr would also have to fly in a sparring partner, or he's got some, they've got everything in-house at City Kickboxing, which would be very interesting. Like, they do have a boxing department. I think Doug Viney leads the boxing crew, and then you've got Eugene Behrman leading the MMA crew. But am I kind of like, do you get that feeling as well? Like, if Joseph Parker's trying to fly over a sparring partner who I think he's actually worked with quite a bit, surely that kind of line of thinking has to apply to Junior Farr as well, or could Junior Farr just be not having an international sparring partner? What do you think of that whole little situation?
Well, I struggle to imagine why either of them would have an international sparring partner, because it doesn't seem like the most important thing to be doing for their preparation. Like, I mean, if anything, I would think Junior Farr would be better served from having, I think he'd get a lot more out of having an international sparring partner. I don't know. I mean, sparring's a major part of the preparation, so I guess it's all part of the routine. But I would have thought you'd be able to find some fellas around the traps in New Zealand. I don't know. Like, considering it's tricky, because you do actually want those like experienced guys who can come in and offer you something, and even with a bit of advice, but also just the experience of being able, like, you can't just chuck a rank amateur in there and expect them to be able to offer you something valuable, like even just in the rounds you'd get in. So I don't know. I'm sure it's doable though if you really wanted to.
Maybe it becomes more about like who has the better setup in New Zealand, because Joseph Parker's done a lot of work. He kind of spends a lot of time in Las Vegas.
He's pretty much based in Las Vegas.
With Kevin Barry. So maybe this fight becomes more about who has the better setup and system in place in New Zealand. Maybe, I don't know. And that's just kind of me falling back into that City Kickboxing bias. So I'll just leave it there. But I will stick with combat sports, because I just want to lay some stuff out for casual Kiwi sports fans, because I'm seeing a lot of headlines around the idea of Israel Adesanya versus Jon Jones. For those who are fresh into like UFC matters, maybe like yourself, Wildcard, Jon Jones is widely known as, depending on who you ask, the greatest or one of the top 2 or 3 greatest MMA fighters there's ever been. He's retired now, but you never know with that sort of shit. And Israel Adesanya has consistently hinted at some point in the kind of speak it into existence stuff that a lot of the fighters do, he came out the gate and he was like, at one point I want to fight Jon Jones, and now they've got a bit of back and forth. Well, they always have a bit of back and forth on the social media, and that builds up this frenzy around Israel Adesanya versus Jon Jones. So I did mention about the UFC kind of media, market, fandom as being a strange place. And that's flown into this week because now there is all the headlines about Israel Adesanya versus Jon Jones, all the discussion around it, and Adesanya and Jon Jones themselves are very vocal on social media, and that obviously means that they're antagonizing each other on social media. So all of that natural angst is there for that fight. I would say, however, that City Kickboxing under Eugene Beerman, their focus will be defending the title bout in this division that Israel Adesanya is in. I think it's the middleweight division, and then Jon Jones is in the light heavyweight division, then you go to the heavyweight division. And both, or more so Jon Jones, he's very good at staying in the media even when nothing's happening. Like, that kind of goes back to what I was saying about the UFC fandom and just how UFC operates. You got to be in the news cycle. You got to be making headlines to sell tickets and building the fan base, and you got to be out there, and that's just kind of what they're doing. I believe that they will fight sometime. I do believe that they will get there, but I also believe that Adesanya's priority and this priority of the City Kickboxing coaching staff is to defend the title bout in this division where there's plenty of contenders. Israel Adesanya's mentioned Jared Cannonier coming up next. Jared Cannonier's going to fight Robert Whittaker. So if Cannonier wins that fight, he will fight Israel Adesanya. But if Robert Whittaker wins, things get a bit interesting and we might have a rematch there. But there's no shortage of other contenders. So I will lay this out there for the listeners. Just tap out of like UFC media stuff. Personally, I dabble in it because I like to know what's going on. But it's definitely a case of when there is a fight, that's when you step in. That's when you educate yourself. That's when you start to engage with a lot of the UFC media. When there's nothing happening and they are looking to these like storylines, because a lot of the UFC media outlets, they get more views, they get more clicks when there is something like when their video is headlined with Jon Jones and Israel Adesanya. That brings in more views. So they're going to keep pumping out that content because that stuff gets way more views. But if you're a casual Kiwi sports fan, you don't need to worry about any of that. Just worry about when there is a fight official, then you start to step in and learn about the styles, learn about the context. But until then, given how the UFC media and the UFC fandom operates, if you're a casual sports fan, just pay no mind to it. Just don't even worry about it and deal with the actual fights that come up. And if you're also a casual Kiwi sports fan, you can probably invest your UFC time in learning more about Brad Riddell and learning more about Dan Hooker and those fighters coming out of City Kickboxing, because that's going to be far more useful than wondering and worrying about a fight that is being whipped up as though it's going to happen ASAP, but probably won't happen for another 6 to 12 months.
So it's the old waiting game, I suppose, which is such a common thing in all combat sports, ain't it? Like, I was just looking at I was looking at the box recs of Junior Fire and Joseph Parker while we're doing that, and I was like, just to check on the old I just wanted to see like the differences in like the old tail of the tape, as they say, and Junior Fire is an inch or two taller or something like that, which is the main thing I wanted to see. I'm pretty sure he's got longer reach, but I have to log in to see some of the other whatevers. But and one of the things I was looking at is just, I got scrolling through the thing to see when Anthony Joshua's next fight is, which is in December, and that's going to be an entire year since his previous fight, and it's like, he's not even in a Tyson Fury type situation. Obviously, there's reasons why he didn't fight in July. He normally has like a 6-month break in between, like he fights twice a year, once in the middle, once at the end, but like, an entire year off is one of those sports, and this is not even that uncommon in boxing, or more uncommon in MMA, where you get a bit more, like the UFC keeps its fighters more active, I think. But like, it's just funny when you look at like say we were talking about football a little bit earlier. I think that was on the preamble, wasn't it? But and the rush of fixtures and players having to play 3 times in a week and stuff like that to get like throughout the restart and whatever, to get all the games done in time so that they could start the season at the right time. And it's like, there are sports out there where you can go an entire year in between your like events, which is it's just a different scene, isn't it? Just a different, it's not right or wrong. It's very obvious reasons why, if you're going to be in a ring getting punched in the face for an extended amount of time, you don't want to do that every weekend. But yeah, just different circumstances for different sports, I suppose.
I will, like with Adesanya could have 3 more fights by the end of 2021. So there's plenty of options there. I'm just saying the Jon Jones fight that is going to be front and center in all the headlines, that's the one to kick back on. Partly because Israel Adesanya does want to be very busy. Adesanya does want to be a champion who defends his bout against contenders and not waltz off to another division and look for the big cash fight. So, yeah, it is. I'll adopt a similar line of thinking as you there and say it's a very interesting how, these two sports operate, and also very interesting how New Zealand's prominence in both sport has exploded over the past 10 years. Like, obviously, there were plenty of, we've had David Tua with boxing have a heavyweight title fight. Shane Cameron's been doing his thing. New Zealand has a long history of boxing, kickboxing, striking sports. So that's always been present. But over the last 10 years, there has been a definite explosion as far as high performers in either sport goes. Wildcard, do you want to... let's do a bit of NRL. We usually leave the NRL to a bit later. We'll do the NRL now, and then we've got a bit of cricket. We've got the White Ferns. I wrote about the bit of a Plunkett Shield look-see today, so we'll touch on that as well. And then we'll see what's happening in the football department with you, Wildcard, and whatever else we want to talk about. I am curious about what you thought about this round of NRL footy. First round of NRL Finals, I thought the Roosters would defeat the Panthers. They didn't. And then the Raiders defeated the Sharks, the Melbourne Storm defeated the Eels, and the Rabbitohs steamrolled the Knights. Very interesting how a lot of these teams, like the Sharks, Eels, and Knights, I think, all scored a couple of tries early, but then fell away dramatically as their opponents steamrolled home. Plenty of Kiwi NRL talent front and centre, like I wrote about yesterday in the Monday Morning Dummy Half. Penrith Panthers have James Fisher-Harris from Northland. He has been... You look at the Panthers' middle forwards, it's hard to just celebrate James Fisher-Harris and not also celebrate someone like Isa Yo, because James Talma is pretty good as well, but those three are a huge reason why the Panthers are good, because they're middle forwards who are automatically suited to the quicker tempo of NRL footy in 2020. Isa Yo used to, I think he made his debut at centre. So he's got great mobility, speed, footwork. James Fisher-Harris lives for that. He's all over the show, super mobile. So I highlighted Fisher-Harris with the Panthers. I highlighted Joseph Tapine, who was excellent for the Raiders and kind of gets overlooked in that Raiders forward pack, but he's a massive, powerful unit, great footwork, and he's an excellent defender. Like, he whacks people, and along with Nelson Asofa-Solomona, who I also mentioned, with the Melbourne Storm, all three of those blokes have, I think their tackle efficiency is up like 91%. Granted, tackling in the middle of the field is going to be a bit easier because you've got more players around you and less space. So you would expect players in the middle of the field to have higher tackle efficiency. But those three all have 91% at least in their tackle efficiency, all super mobile. Fisher Harris is way more busier. I think he is among the top players in the NRL for total runs, and that means he has more run meters, and that means he has more post-contact meters. But the difference for Joseph Tapine and Asofa-Solomona is they have more tackle bus, and they have more offloads. So I find it very interesting, and all three of those players are from outside of Auckland. James Fisher Harris is from the Hokianga region up north and spent time, I think he went to Whangarei Boys High School. Joseph Tapine and Nelson Asofa-Solomona, they're both from Wellington. So two of the best young Kiwis forwards are from Wellington, which is pretty cool. So they got a lot of my focus over this weekend. All three of those teams won, and all three of those young Kiwi NRL forwards or Kiwis forwards contributed strongly to those wins. So that was pretty cool. Shout out, like, the Storm obviously have Brandon Smith, Jesse Bromwich. Kenny Bromwich was really good on the Storm's left edge as well, punching through gaps and getting an offload out. And then I've talked about a fair bit with the Raiders, just the balance of having Saliva Havili as a middle forward, not playing hooker. Corey Harawira-Naera coming off the bench as well, mobile, dynamic. Anything else? Like, how did you... Well, I don't know. Where do you want to go with that? Round 1 NRL Finals footy, Wildcard. What caught your eye?
A couple things. I don't know where we should start. I might ask you about the Panthers, because I think the Panthers are probably the team who I not changed opinions on the most from week 1, but I think they consolidated something where it was like, and beating who'd they beat, the Roosters, It was like the Panthers minor premiers had such a good season. They also had a few things going their way, like the fact that they basically got to play home games the whole way through and whatever. And I just think they were a little more unproven coming into the finals, despite the fact that they finished first. And getting that week 1 win probably means more to them, sort of legitimizing their title hopes than anyone else had on offer. Well, some teams are playing to avoid elimination, but I don't think any of the teams playing to avoid elimination serious contenders. Maybe the Raiders, but they were never going to lose against the Sharks. At least I didn't think so. And like even the Rabbitohs getting a big win, like that was not a particularly high quality. That was easily the worst quality of the 4 games, from what I saw of them anyway. A lot of errors, especially early on. And the way they rolled the Knights, I mean, the Knights gave up towards the end. Like the scoreline blew out because the Knights were done. They were ready to go home. So I don't know that I really learned a whole lot from anything other than that. But did you have any thoughts on the Panthers? Do you see them as probably? Oh, I don't know. Do you see? I was going to say, do you see them as favorites now? Probably not favorites, but do you see them like as on an equal footing with Roosters, Storm, potentially Eels, Raiders? Probably a tier below that, but. Or just thoughts on what makes them tick and everything like that. You got it. And then after that, I'm going to ask you something about Dylan Brown as well. But let's do Panthers first.
It's very strange you said Dylan Brown, because I just opened a tab on Dylan Brown.
There we go.
I was kind of foreseeing talking about Dylan Brown. You asked him. The Panthers. So in previewing that game, I kind of thought that the Panthers hadn't been tested and you had a battle-hardened Roosters outfit. And fair play to the Panthers, they dealt with the test of the Roosters, and that that is what solidifies you. Like, if you haven't had that test, or if you haven't had that challenge, and you're going into a super like grand final, like if the Roosters just offered absolutely nothing against the Panthers in that game, I would still be a bit like, well, the Panthers kind of need to face some adversity here. Or they can just have a fairy tale run to the grand final. I don't know. But like at some point you need to face some adversity. The Roosters gave them that adversity and the Panthers responded. So that was good to see from the Panthers. I do have a bit of an idea with the Roosters because Sonny Bill Williams was a late exclusion. And I think, Jake Friend didn't play. And what I was possibly pondering is that maybe the Roosters, Trent Robinson, his manner doesn't suggest this. Like, Trent Robinson was very annoyed and proud at the same time of making a contest. And, like, obviously the Roosters are going to go out and try and win that game because they did that. They made it a very competitive game. But I am a bit wary that the Roosters probably had one eye on this week's games because they'll probably get Jake Friend back at hooker, and the Sonny Bill Williams thing got me thinking about this. Like, if you know that Jake Friend is going to be back for this weekend's game against the Raiders, and maybe Sonny Bill Williams has a niggling injury, just leave them out. We'll deal with what we can with the Panthers. Ideally, we win that game and we get a week off. Or they don't play and we've got another week to go. So I'm not too down on the Roosters from that game. Like, I still think the Roosters and the Storm are huge factors in this finals run. And the Roosters weren't at their best as far as roster goes for that game. And I reckon They had one eye on this coming game when they can probably have Jake Friend and they'll probably have Sonny Bill Williams. Like, if those two don't play, then I've got my theory wrong, but we'll wait and see. Like, with the Panthers, I think it's so obvious that everyone can see, and so everyone has the same assessment and the same judgment. Like, they just have fun. They're very fast and they're very vibrant. And it's kind of amazing how far that can carry you. Like, if you're just very energetic and you're having fun with your team in the world of professional sport, that can still be a difference maker at the highest level. And I think that's what the Panthers do. Like, yes, they have great players. They've probably got the best halfback in Nathan Cleary. Jerome Luai, I was very interested, considering what's happened with Moeaki Fotuaika, who, born and raised in Gisborne, moved over to the Gold Coast as a teenager, and he wants to play for Queensland now over New Zealand. He'll probably still be able to play for Tonga. And I was like, Fotuaika and a Tongan forward pack would be amazing. But on the back of that, and even Moses Leota, who's a Panthers forward, he was also born and raised in Auckland and moved over to Sydney, I think in his teenage years. He's now being talked about in the New South Wales mix. So, yes, the Aotearoa Kiwis have great depth, and I wasn't relying on Fotuaika or Leota playing for the Kiwis. I think Fotuaika was probably going to play for Tonga, and I think Moses Leota is also Tongan. So I wasn't like expecting them to be available for the Kiwis, but it is like a bit of a, I don't know, like I thought about like if you're just seeing numerous athletes not want to represent New Zealand, it kind of just beats you down a bit. Like, it just gets a bit sad. Like, why do all these people not want to represent New Zealand? Like, that's strange. And fair play, everyone has different circumstances. I've got a very open mind as far as eligibility goes, but when it's over and over again, I'm kind of talking about my Kiwi sports mind as opposed to a wider thing. I just find it, a bit draining when people consistently don't want to represent New Zealand. Like, that's just a bit sad. But I say all that because Jerome Luai has apparently taken himself out of the New South Wales mix and the Australian mix, and he's debating whether he wants to represent New Zealand or Samoa. I think he's got a Māori mum, and both his parents were born in New Zealand, but he was born and raised in Sydney. He is a junior Kiwis captain, but that doesn't mean anything because Moeaki Fotuaika played for the junior Kiwis. Like, there's been endless players who played for the junior Kiwis and then didn't want to represent the Kiwis. Like, that's happened plenty of times. So I was eager to see where Jerome Luai's eligibility will sit, and like, it'll be great if he plays for Samoa. Like, Samoa could have Jerome Luai and Mason Lino. Mason Lino that was a bummer as well. I'm kind of going off on a bit of a tangent here away from the Panthers, but just bear with me. Mason Lino was initially named in the halves for the Knights for this game. He's played the last few games for the Knights, and then last minute, Kurt Mann gets shifted from hooker to play in the halves, and they bring in some young guy, Randall, and the Knights get pumped. So I just kind of viewed that as like not negative. I don't know what the term is, but it wasn't a good look for Mason Lino in the sense that Coach Adam O'Brien, probably Mitchell Pearce as well, because he's the halfback, they went away from Mason Lino in the halves, which was a bummer because Mason Lino had worked hard all season, got a couple of games at the end of the season, and let's not forget, Mason Lino is a half at the Knights, and mid-season the Knights signed Blake Green. So obviously the Knights didn't really give a shit about Mason Lino. But let's be honest here. But for Samoa could have Mason Lino and Jerome Luai. Now, I'm not saying that Mason Lino is the second coming of Nathan Cleary. I'm just saying for a Samoan team that has been in the wilderness for a couple of years while Tonga has had their patch of dominance, if you're a Samoan, you're looking at that and you're like, come on, like, what's up with Samoa? At least Samoa has a possible halves combination there with Jerome Luai and Mason Lino. When you look at Tonga, well, Ata Hingano hasn't played a game of rugby league this year because he left the Raiders to join the Mackay Cutters in Queensland's reserve grade competition. No reserve grade this season. And Tui Lolohea is playing in England. So Tui Lolohea is all good. He can step up to play for Tonga. He's done it before. You're still going to have Saliva Havili at hooker. But there's no other half. Like, Tonga's success was built on that massive forward pack, but it was also built on having Saliva Havili at hooker, rotating with Sione Katoa, even Manasi Fainu when he was not involved in a criminal case, and then having the stability of Ata Hingano and Tui Lolohea in the halves, Will Hopoare at fullback. As great as their forward pack is, Tonga's success depends on having a steady spine. And I'm not sure that that's there. But none of that matters because we're probably not going to get any international footy. So swing back to Jerome Luai. I was interested to see that he's open to playing for the Kiwis and Samoa, which is pretty good. And he is excellent. Like, you've got Nathan Cleary, who is a very good halfback and combines the organizational role, accurate kicking, and a bit of razzle-dazzle as well. Like, you can't just be a Blake Green, plain Jane halfback. You need to have razzle-dazzle. You need to have a running game. You need to have a variety of passes in your arsenal. So you got that with Nathan Cleary, and then you've got Jerome Luai bouncing all over the show. Like, his skill set is sublime. And that's the balance you want when you're dealing with a really good rugby league team, is that you don't want Ben Hunt and, you don't want Cody Nikorima and Anthony Milford in the halves. I remember that as a terrible halves combination for the Broncos. Like, you don't want two off the cuff razzle dazzle type of halves. You want Nathan Cleary and Jarome Luai. That's what you want, and the Panthers have it. Probably, right now, they're definitely the best halves combination in the NRL. There's scope for other halves combinations to step up and take that claim, that title, in the most clutch moment of the season. But right now, Luai and Cleary are the best halves combination. And with that, you've got, like, you know, the Warriors wildcard, Ken Mamalo, David Fusatua, very big, powerful outside backs. The Panthers have Brian To'o and Josh Mansour, neither of whom are very big. But they absolutely chew up run meters. I'm just looking at the post-contact meters for the whole NRL. Josh Mansour is 10th, and Brian To'o is 30th. Very impressive for two smaller wingers, and that's what you need in the NRL. And combine that with the very mobile, slightly smaller forward pack, and the Panthers are very good. Very good. What were you going to ask about old Dill Brown?
Well, Dylan Brown missed the last few weeks, didn't he? And the Parramatta Eels were still, well, I mean, they were winning games without him. They were a little bit up and down. Everyone was a little bit up and down. But they just, I don't know, they didn't seem to have quite the same spark about them. And then he comes back and they do lose to the Storm, and they, you know, lost by a couple spare tries, and they were, I wouldn't say comfortably outplayed. It makes them sound like they were thrashed, but the better team did win that game. However, it was still, I think, 18-all with about half an hour to go, something like that. And I don't know, maybe the overall, like, result and impact of everything doesn't necessarily suggest it, but certainly just watching it, like, from the eye test, the Eels were just so much better with Dylan Brown in there. And it was one of those things that was mentioned a little bit by the commentators throughout the way, and it was, like, they sort of mentioned it like he was this sort of undercover secret weapon, and maybe he is to a lot of people. We've talked about him a lot and how, like, just what an excellent season he's had. And, I mean, you know more about this than I do, but, like, from my perspective, I don't, like, whenever they talk about Mitchell Moses and his X Factor and whatever, it's like, yeah, Dylan Brown's a different type of player, which is why they probably complement each other quite well for what you're just saying about how those combos are supposed to work. But I don't really have any doubt left in my mind that Dylan Brown is a better player. Like, Mitchell Moses to me seems one of those fellas who's good, but also a bit overrated. Like, I think he would struggle if you took Clint Gutherson out of that team, for example, as well. Like, I don't know, I haven't watched enough of the Eels throughout the season to really get, like, a complete vibe, but I don't know exactly what the question is supposed to be about all this, but just, like, the Eels clearly looked like a much more, regardless of the fact that they lost, they clearly look like a much more complete team with Dylan Brown in there. I don't think that, particularly over the other side of the Tasman Sea, I'm not sure that his reputation is quite at the level where it should be quite yet. I mean, if he was a dude who was suddenly about to be picked for Origin, I think his star would be a lot brighter in the Australian media. I think he's still one of those kind of, like, well-kept secrets in a way, like, just not him as a person, as a player, but just, like, the extent to his influence within that team. Like, yeah, I don't know that this is going to lead to a question at all. I think it's just a celebration of what an excellent player he is. And every time I watch him, he looks like one of the very best players on the field. And it's like, this isn't something that happens, like, every now and then he has an amazing game. I'm saying, like, every time I watch the Eels, which is at random, but still, like, he seems to be one of the most impressive players on the park. It's just like, it seems a little bit undeniable to me at this point. So, I don't know, I'll leave it at just saying, I guess this is a celebration of him. But was there anything specific? I don't know. I found a question after all. Was there anything specific you noticed with him coming back and what he offered?
Well, I kind of preferred it when you didn't ask a question because I was going to.
Okay, scratch that then.
I was going
Doesn't matter.
I was going to extrapolate this out to Marata Niokori as well, because this was his first game back after missing. I think he suffered a concussion against the Warriors, and he didn't play since then. So this was his first game back from injury, and it's hard to really put into context like how Marata Niokori helps the Parramatta Eels forward pack. I could say that like against the Storm, Marata Niokori, he had the best tackling percentage of all the Parramatta Eels forwards. But as I'll allude to in a second, that probably doesn't mean a whole lot. He wasn't as dynamic with running the footy. However, I bring up Marata Niokori, who went to Aotearoa College. He's a Mangere East junior. He was a junior Warrior. After finishing under-20s with the Warriors, he went to the Parramatta Eels. Marata Niokori, from a Kiwi perspective, has been amazing in the Parramatta Eels forward pack. But of course, when you've got Junior Paulo and you've got Regan Campbell-Gillard, who, whenever those two players are in any bit of little good form, the hype just goes hundies because they're origin, blah, blah, blah. Like, even Sean Lane, Ryan Madison, Nathan Brown, plenty of different players to get the attention. But in the same vein as Dylan Brown, Marata Niokori is very, very good in that Parramatta Eels team. And it's harder to prove, but I would suggest that Marata Niokori, his return was very important for the Parramatta Eels, and his presence is conducive to the Eels winning games of footy. Dylan Brown, like, it's been that way all season long, Wildcard, because when the Eels were playing great footy, none of the attention was on Dylan Brown, and then when the Eels start having their late season plateau, no one's talking about Dylan Brown's absence. And I found it strange because, like you, it is very easy to see how good Dylan Brown is. And this is his second year of NRL footy. He is 20 years old. And he looks at ease in the halves in the NRL. That alone is rather amazing. And I mentioned Kenny Bromwich earlier. The Eels have a couple of defensive issues out wide. Kenny Bromwich was on the left edge for the Melbourne Storm, and Mitchell Moses was on the right edge for the Parramatta Eels. So they're lining up against each other. And coming into the finals, I was a bit curious, like how, because we've been watching a lot of NBA playoffs and finals basketball. So I was curious, like, how does rugby league change from regular season to the finals? Obviously, the finals, I use the term finals in the NRL for the whole finals campaign, not the NBA finals. And we saw it against the Melbourne Storm because the Melbourne Storm target the matchup. Like, when you get into the NBA playoffs, if you're a shit defender, you're going to be sucked in. You're going to be targeted brutally. Like, not just like, oh, we might go here, we might target him on this play, and then we'll go. No, 5 or 6 plays directed at that shit defender. Let's do that because we want to win. And that's what the Storm did against Mitchell Moses. I mentioned the tackle efficiency numbers. So Mitchell Moses missed 6 tackles against the Melbourne Storm. And that amounted to 74.2% tackle efficiency, but Dylan Brown's tackle efficiency was 84%. That surprised me because I didn't expect him to be that low, and he only missed 1 tackle. So there's this other thing called ineffective tackles that apparently impacts tackle efficiency. I'm not too sure about that, but I just chucked that up there because I referred to tackle efficiency before. But over the season, Dylan Brown is tackling at 90.5% tackle efficiency as a 20-year-old in his second season of NRL footy. And he's also made 438 tackles. I ran some numbers earlier in the season, and I'll just talk my way through it as I bring it up here. Because at the time of writing about it, Dylan Brown had made the most tackles of any half in the whole NRL as a 20-year-old in his second fucking season. He is the most tackling half of the NRL, and he's also doing it at 90.5% tackle efficiency. So the only players who have made more tackles than Dylan Brown, this isn't an exact science, I can't be bothered explaining it all, but Wade Graham, Cameron Smith, Kurt Mann, Ben Hunt, they all spend time in the forward pack. Dylan Brown's the only player who has played every game in the halves. So Dylan Brown has made the most tackles of any half, and he's tackling at 90.5% efficiency. Compare that to Mitchell Moses, who has made almost he's one tackle off from making exactly 100 tackles fewer than Dylan Brown, and Mitchell Moses is tackling at 81.7% efficiency. Now take that. So obviously there's a massive disparity between their defensive abilities. Dylan Brown averages 113 run meters per game, and Mitchell Moses averages 65. So that puts into perspective, Dylan Brown is a great defender, and he's a very good runner of the footy. Compared to Mitchell Moses, that puts absolute shade all over Mitchell Moses, and if anyone people in New Zealand listening to this, pay attention to Dylan Brown, because that kid is very good at rugby league. Really, really good at rugby league. But the thing with the Eels, as you said, is that they have Mitchell Moses and Dylan Brown have a complementary fit, because Mitchell Moses does all the kicking. So Mitchell Moses had, 14 kicks against the Storm, and Dylan Brown had only 3, and Reid Mahoney, the hooker, had 3 kicks as well. So Dylan Brown doesn't really do much kicking. He runs the footy and he passes the footy. It's all pretty similar, simple for Dylan Brown. So their fit as a halves combination is complementary, and they work well together. But in the finals, opposition teams are going to target Mitchell Moses, and they're not going to target Dylan Brown. And obviously, coming from New Zealand, I think Dylan Brown is far superior to Mitchell Moses. And if there was a Kiwis international campaign to finish the year, Dylan Brown would be in the Kiwis squad. And if Jon Johnson's out injured with his Achilles, you would be looking at a possible Kiwis halves combination of Dylan Brown and Jerome Hughes, or Dylan Brown and Jerome Luai, or Jerome Luai and Jerome Hughes. Maybe Dylan Brown and Benji Marshall. Dylan Brown is very, very good. He doesn't have any real weakness. He's not a defensive liability. And we're seeing it in the finals that everything tightens up, and it's about ruthlessly targeting a weak link. They're not targeting Dylan Brown, that's for damn sure.
Which, when you're considering, what we're talking about is Craig Bellamy and the Melbourne Storm, that's about as high a compliment as you can get, right?
Yes, very much so. And they would, you would expect them to know exactly what's happening with Mitchell Moses, and it's probably we're playing the Parramatta Eels, what are we going to do? A lot of traffic down that edge. I'm just checking out Kenny Bromwich's numbers, because he, as I said, was matching up against Mitchell Moses. Not specifically against him, but they were targeting Mitchell Moses with Kenny Bromwich. He had 10 runs for 104 meters, so that Kenny Bromwich doesn't put up big stats. Neither does Felice Kafusi. They just do their job for the Melbourne Storm. But Kenny Bromwich averaged 10 meters per run, which is a lot more than he usually does. He had a line break. He had a line break assist. He had a couple tackle busts. not flowed, and he didn't miss a tackle. So, like, Kenny Bromwich had one of his best games of the season lining up against Mitchell Moses, and that is because the Melbourne Storm had a game plan. They just targeted that Mitchell Moses bit there, and to swing around to your original point, yes, I do believe Dylan Brown gets overlooked at the Parramatta Eels by a lot of the Australian media. But I also think that his style of play doesn't necessarily lend itself to attention, if you know what I'm saying. He's not out there doing a lot of swashbuckling stuff. Dylan Brown isn't Sean Johnson. He might, build into that skill set. A better comparison maybe is Jerome Luai. Like, Dylan Brown's not Jerome Luai, but he's different. And I do believe once Dylan Brown's really, really comfortable, gets more share of the footy, he will express his creativity on the field. But what you get with Dylan Brown is you get 100 running meters every game, and you get really, really good defense. That's not going to necessarily catch the eye of a lot of viewers. That's not going to be on the highlights. He does have highlight plays, for sure. But that's also good because the lightning rod is Mitchell Moses. So Dylan Brown doesn't get a lot of that maybe negative attention as well. So it works both ways, because if the Eels suck, it's going to be Mitchell Moses who bears the brunt of that burden. Dylan Brown can kind of just fly under the radar, and he's not going to publicly get a lot of that fire, whereas Mitchell Moses definitely is. So it works, it all balances out, and point being, Dylan Brown's really, really good.
Yeah, if the Eels suck and they lose, and Mitchell Moses gets the lightning rod attention, he probably also deserves it. To be honest, the first round of the you already compared it in the matchup kind of coaching tactical aspect to how the NBA finals or the NBA playoffs work. I think there's a secondary comparison there as well, because the first round in the NBA playoffs generally isn't that interesting. You've got like first seed versus eighth and stuff. You'll normally get a really excellent 4 versus 5 series or something like that. Or maybe there's a team that's like had a great second half of the season, couple late trades, pushed up into like 6th seed or something, and they are good enough to challenge the 3rd seed. But generally, like there aren't that many upsets in the first round. It's sort of like business as usual, and it's a lot like that in the NRL Finals as well. I kind of feel like just that first week where the top 4 teams can do like what you hinted the Sydney Roosters might have been doing, and just not phoning it in by any means, but just certainly knowing that they have that awareness of next week. Like they're not expecting to be eliminated. And then in a season like this, you also had like the Sharks basically limped into the playoffs, and the Knights didn't quite limp into the playoff. They were a little up and down, but then certainly like didn't put their best account of themselves forward in that game either. And it's just like it's sort of the stakes aren't as high as it could be. But then after that first round in the NBA stuff, you get into some outstanding matchups in the second round leading into like conference finals and beyond. Like, and it's very much the same. Like, this is the point in the season now where things get just like tantalizingly exciting. And we've got this week, we have the both games kicking off at 9:50. One on Friday night, we got Sydney versus Canberra. On Saturday, we got Parramatta versus South Sydney. Do you perceive an upset possibility in either of those games? Because it feels like probably Roosters Eels should win. But I don't know. Do you see any sort of funkiness in those two matchups?
Yes, because I think the Raiders can defeat the Roosters, and I think the Rabbitohs can defeat the Eels.
There we go.
But that's because there are two real good games of footy. Whereas the first round, you've got teams that are coming into the finals from very different positions. It would be the same in the NBA or any other competition where you've got a long season and then a finals campaign. There's going to be teams that are like the Sharks and the Knights, right? They were coming into the finals on a wheelchair. Not in the sense of their injuries, but in the sense of they weren't very good. Like, they did have injuries, for sure. Like, the Sharks losing Jon Jones, well, it's over. You're not going to win in the finals without the guy who's got the most try assists in the whole NRL. So maybe that wheelchair thing did fit. But the point being that some teams are going to be in great form. Some teams are going to be, a bit up and down because they might have rested a few players in the last few rounds. And then you're going to have some teams who just suck coming into the finals, but they earned their finals spot early in the season. And that is deservedly so. Like, if you win enough games early in the season, the only thing that matters is what kind of form you want to carry into the finals. So for the Eels, it wasn't ideal. They banked all their points at the start of the season, but how they came into the finals wasn't ideal, but they had earned it. So fair play. So I do find that interesting that there are just, when you're working into a finals campaign for any sport or any sporting competition, every team has a different trajectory to the finals. Every team is coming from a slightly different position. And even with the Roosters and the Rabbitohs lost to the Bulldogs, then they smoked the Roosters, then they smoked the Knights. Who knows what the Rabbitohs want to do in the finals? Everyone likes the Roosters, but we just like the Roosters because they've been the best team over the last 5 years. And it's all that's what makes it very interesting and so engaging, is because you're, from my sports nerd perspective, I'm thinking, what methods are working for different teams? Because you look at a team like the Canberra Raiders, they had a slower start to the season. They had a slower middle period of the season. Obviously, they lost Josh Hodgson as well. But what the Raiders did do was slowly build into the finals. And I think there's a fair chance that they defeat the Roosters, because they're going to come out with a certain energy, a certain vigor. They have the right skill set because they throw the footy around. They have, kicking options that they can work with. They have a mobile, nimble, powerful forward pack. They have skills on their edges. They have finishes. They have everything you need, and they adequately built into the finals campaign, which I think could work in their favor, as opposed to the Roosters, who kind of have been all over the place to get to this point. So if you want a prediction, I'd go with the Raiders and the Rabbitohs, actually.
Both of them, eh?
I've talked myself into Raiders. That's for damn sure. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Roosters win and normal service resumes for the Roosters. But I've definitely just talked myself into backing the Raiders there.
Yeah, it's almost like that first round is just that last, a final shuffle of the deck, eh? No one's there accidentally, but people arrive in different circumstances, as you say. And then you come into this next round where, you sort of do have to lean towards the, it's all a bit different this year as well, because crowds and home field advantage don't apply, so I expect there's even more upset potential than ordinarily. Or at least those things don't apply to the level as they should ordinarily, with a absolutely pumping stadium and etc. It's you sort of do need to lean towards if I'm talking from a perspective of a bookie or something like that, you got to lean towards the favorites, but at the same time, no one gets to this point accidentally. Those other teams, the Raiders and the Rabbitohs, they had to win a finals game to get to this point. So, like, contrasting that bookie metaphor, but all bets are off in a way as well at the same time, because like this is just why it's so exciting, because at this point it's not even worth predicting, because who really knows what is going to happen? You're just going to get a bloody interesting game one way or another.
Yeah, very much so indeed, Wildcard.
The beauty of the finals, eh?
Beauty of the finals. Have you caught much of the White Ferns ODI series? They had the T20 series where they kind of got smoked. Nothing really notable happened there. If you want to know what happened, you can read my T20 series debrief, and then they come into the ODI series. Suzie Bates gets injured in the first ODI, out for the rest of the series, and Australia have won the first two ODIs, wrapping up the series with a game to play. I am interested if what you've made of the ODI series or just the whole White Ferns campaign thus far, Wildcard, but I do want to chuck up this idea to maybe help you think about the White Ferns, because without Suzie Bates, the constant theme and narrative around the White Ferns is the gap in contributions from Suzie Bates, Sophie Devine, Amy Satterthwaite, and then to a lesser extent Amelia Kerr, although she's a bit more inconsistent with her contributions. And the reason the White Ferns haven't continued on a positive upward trend as far as results go is because of that gap between the best players contributing and the rest of the team finding ways to help their team win, as far as scoring runs when you need to, taking wickets when you need to, and just helping your team win. So without Suzie Bates, the idea of other players having to step up becomes even more important. It becomes even more relevant. So it feels like my general consensus on the White Ferns has now been amplified, and that just makes it a little bit more interesting, especially when like Natalie Dodd comes into open for the ODI team, and she's actually looked pretty good. I've been impressed with Natalie Dodd. And in the second ODI, the only three players to score over 30 were Natalie Dodd, Sophie Devine, and Amy Satterthwaite. I'm not saying Natalie Dodd is part of that Suzie Bates, Devine, Satterthwaite trio, but at the very least, Natalie Dodd has found a way to do her job and contribute to some extent. But other than that, it's still, well, the other aspect of like who's going to step up in the absence of Suzie Bates is, well, Sophie Devine and Amy Satterthwaite could just step up even further. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Like, they're excellent and they're amazing. Like, it's watching Amy Satterthwaite come in and just struggle a little bit at the start of that second ODI innings where she scored 69. The White Ferns got steamrolled in that first ODI, so there were no real notable scores. But Amy Satterthwaite just assessed conditions, and then when you're watching Amy Satterthwaite in full motion, she is really, 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 really good at batting. Really good at batting. And it's a pleasure to watch. But I do want to see other players stand up and other players taking some of the responsibility to score runs away from that big three. So I am intrigued. Like, what have you made about this White Ferns ODI series thus far?
Yeah, I've watched a fair bit of it. Specifically the ODI, I watched most of the, or almost all of the second ODI. I only stopped because it was very clear that we were about to lose and I couldn't bear to hang on any longer for an inevitable several wicket defeat. So, yeah, it's like, it's weird because everything you just said is also true, even though it feels like I went around in a circle to end up back at the same place. Like, the first ODI, there was 6 for 83 or something. So, I mean, that game, like batting first, that game's gone at that point. And the main thing watching it is you come back to just regardless of what the White Ferns do, Australia is just really, really, really good. Like, they're just a completely and utterly dominant women's cricket team in every format. I think when we beat them in the third T20, it had been the first time since like 2017 or something like that. I think it was our first win over Australia in 17 games in all formats. And then get that little monkey off the back at the end of the T20 series, and we come into an ODI series and they were nursing like an 18-game winning streak or something like that. And there's just no margin for error, like, at all. You play against Australia there, and like, even when they're getting a good partnership together, as happened in both the ODIs, they had at least one big sort of that they got it earlier on in the innings, in the with between Devine and Satterthwaite in the second one. Who was it who had that little like consolidating one after they went 6 down in the? I'll check because I got the thing open.
I think that was Maddie Green in the first game.
Yeah, and Katie Perkins, I think. Yeah. Got them through to at least a score that they could bowl to and not be, like, hoping not to lose by 10 wickets or whatever. You know, they got them somewhere out of the hole that the top order had dug them. And then, yeah, the big partnership between, like, both the first 2 wickets, they had decent stands there in that second game. But even then, like, even when they're doing quite well, it still felt like they weren't scoring quite quick enough. And 250 odd, whatever they got, was a good score. But then you get the Aussies being interviewed on the sideline throughout, and they're like, I can't remember who it was. One of them got asked. It might have been Alyssa Healy, I think. They asked her about the score line, the target that had been set, and she's like, yeah, it's a good target, but to be honest, we thought it was under par. Like, we would have been targeting 300 coming in, batting first on this wicket, and it's like, we did quite well to get to 250. We got contributions from the 2 best batswomen in the team. Lost a lot of wickets late on, but that was sort of at the point where you got to go, like, they had wickets in hand to be able to try score some quick runs. Maybe didn't capitalize as much, but even if they had, it would be looking at a pretty well-placed innings, like, pretty well-paced innings, where they might have got 270, 280, and Australia coming and talking about getting 300. So it's like, a lot of it, you just sort of have to fall back on the fact that Australia are better, like, considerably better, and they're better than pretty much everyone. Not even pretty much, like, take the qualifier out of there. They're by far the best women's cricket team on the planet right now. And that is contextual when it comes to looking at the White Ferns. But then, yeah, at the same time, it was the reason they did better in the second game was because they got batting contributions from their 2 top batswomen. And that doesn't actually address the fact that they need wider contributions. They need better, I don't know. It's so from all that, I just end up back where we started the series, which is we do need to see more from the others. But at the same time, like, this is the hardest way to do it, Australia, especially at a time where no one's really been playing. Like, it's the first series of the summer, nothing going on, and even training would have been at a minimum during, like, lockdowns and all that. So it's tricky for a number of reasons, and I'll cut the White Ferns a lot of slack for those reasons, but yeah, it's bloody Australia. It's just bloody Australia. And then you got to listen to the Aussie commentators talking about how amazing they are as well. And the sad thing is, it's like with the Channel 9 dudes back in the day. It's like, they're not even wrong. It's just, it's just frustrating to keep hearing throughout the entire broadcast about it, but whatever. I'll be honest though, I've really enjoyed it. Like, it's fun having, like, getting the laptop out, sit in front of the telly, watch a bit of cricket throughout the day, and just like this, it's sunny outside, and like, got the doors and windows open and whatever. It felt like summer again, and I've had a few cricket cravings, especially like we had this international schedule coming out last week, and probably say a few words on that in a sec, I don't know, but like, up until then, just all the Blackcaps stuff, the mid-year tours getting cancelled and whatever, and I'm just waiting to watch a bit of cricket, and then you get these 2020 comps coming around, the Caribbean stuff, the IPL, and this is being advertised big blockbustery, like, here's, like, cricket is back kind of thing, and I couldn't stomach it. I tried a little bit, some of the Caribbean stuff I got glimpses of. It's alright. 2020 cricket just seems like, especially at like below international level, just feels so insubstantial. And honestly, I'm at the point now with the IPL where I used to just not care or pay any attention to it. I still don't really care about it or pay attention to it too much, but I think I'm ready to say on the record that I officially hate it now. Like, I just can't stand the IPL. Like, I now avoid it not because of disinterest, but because it'll just annoy me to see it. It's just a bit of for a variety of reasons, but getting the White Ferns back on tally and in good hours and whatever, it's at least a nice little return, like, not even symbolic, it is the return to cricket properly for New Zealand on an international scale. So I have enjoyed that much, even if it means we're losing to Australia 4 out of 5 games so far, with 1 to go.
I do like the way the Australian women's team is covered by their broadcaster. Like, I have so much more insight into the personalities of the Australian team because they do a great job of helping you learn about the players and let the players express their personality and all of that stuff. They do a far better job than what we've been dished up here in New Zealand. You mentioned the schedule. I've got no idea about the schedule. Like, not to poo-poo your cricket coverage here, Wildcard, but as the chief cricket correspondent, I probably should know what the Blackcaps schedule is, but I never tune into what the schedule announcement is going to be or what it's going to look like. I just kind of deal with the waves as they come and just switch into whatever mode you got to switch. And I don't like forecasting out, I'm going to do this at this time. With regards to covering cricket, so I didn't care at all for the schedule announcement, but what were your thoughts and insights and just vibe of Kiwi men's cricket on the back of those, kind of on the calendar being released for the summer?
There's like, I think the main overwhelming thing is that you can't like underestimate the logistical effort it would have taken just to have an international summer during, like, with everything that's going on. So I think like that much has to be remembered, just as a sort of like baseline to everything else that's said about the thing. There's a disgusting amount of 2020s, which probably not unexpected. What do we have? West Indies come first, 3 2020s and 2 tests, then Pakistan, 3 2020s and 2 tests, then Australia for 5 2020s, which also comes at the expense of us not playing the ODI series that was abandoned at the start of the lockdowns in Australia, which they were hoping to do, but I guess like travel bubbles came too late or whatever, or will come too late, and they just didn't bother. It was going to take too much time out of the summer for both countries if they were having to go back and forth and do quarantines. We could have hosted some ODIs, so that would have been nice. But I think actually that Aussie T20 series, I'm pretty sure their test team is playing at the same time, so there's probably 2 different squads. And then Bangladesh come for 3 ODIs and 3 2020s. White Ferns during all this, I think they have an ODI series with Australia, an ODI series with England, and a T20 tri-series with both of them. I think that's what it was, but it doesn't actually say on the schedule thing that I got here. It says international schedule to be announced. That's for February and March, so it's later down in the thing. The main point is that just the fact that we have a Kiwi summer of cricket is beautiful. That's really nice. I do have 2 complaints about the whole thing. One is the complete and utter disrespect to domestic cricket, with the exception of the Super Smash, which is the only thing that has a schedule out at this point. Even though from what I've read, the Plunket Shield is supposed to start in 2 weeks today. Like, it's not even on the... there's nothing going on about it. Like, the point we make so many times, but it bears repeating every time, because if they want the Plunket Shield to be taken seriously and to get the media attention it deserves, you gotta lead from the front as the the organization that runs the damn thing. Like, don't undermine it at every opportunity like they keep doing. So don't know what's going on about Ford Trophy either. That's the other one. No draw yet. Big old draw for the Super Smash. However, they don't seem to have a bloody, like, the whole Dream 11 thing has disappeared. So that suggests that they're either not going to have a sponsor this year, which sounds like a reckless thing to be doing, to lose sponsorship money entirely. Like, obviously you're going to have to be having less than what you hope for, but I assume there's a sponsor to be named or whatever down the line. But if they do end up with a different sponsor, then that'll be the fifth new sponsor in 7 years since the Super Smash rebranded itself as the Super Smash. I can't remember what it used to be before. It was like the State was the major sponsor before that, and it was called like the 2020 Blast or some crap like that. I can't remember. So the domestic cricket thing is a bit of a weird one. That state of things with the schedule. And then the other one is that the first ODI that we play is mid-March against Bangladesh. And Doc, I'm old enough to remember when the Blackcaps made the last World Cup, ODI World Cup Grand Final, and they drew with England and then lost by technicality. Seems like so long ago. It's actually only about a year and a half ago, and in that time we've played 4 ODIs, and by the time that first game against Bangladesh starts, we'll have only still played 4 ODIs after more than 600 days since playing in the biggest game of ODI on the planet. I don't quite understand how that could possibly happen. Obviously, they've missed out on a lot of ODIs. They were meant to be playing some in their Northern Hemisphere tour in mid-year. Meant to be playing, I think, Ireland, Scotland, Netherlands. There's the 2 games against Australia that got canned because of lockdowns. And a tour to West Indies was the other one. So there was some games that they would have played about 10 more ODIs had there not been for the pandemic. Doesn't still explain why they played so few before that or why they're playing so few right now. I understand it's cheaper just to have a T20, to host a T20, it's cheaper than it is to host an ODI match, but considering ODI is our strongest format, it's bonkers to me that there's so little, it just seems to be such an afterthought, in the way not only this schedule, but last summer's schedule and everything seems to be gone. It's crazy. However, there is, I think, an ODI championship similar to the Test Championship, which is supposed to be starting. That's actually why we were going to go to West Indies, was to kick that little sucker off. So hopefully that means there will be more ODI cricket down the line that will start actually being like ICC imperatives to play ODIs, so it doesn't just get buried in the mix. Because I'm sure you're the same as me, but it's and we're both definitely Test cricket purists, but there is something special about especially those home ODIs, the day-nighters at under lights where you're getting bloody a tight run chase or whatever, and there's just so many special Blackcaps moments that have come in that kind of situation / format, and the lack of ODI cricket coming up in the summer is a concern for me. But at the same time, like you, we just deal with what was the metaphor you used? We deal with the waves as they come, which is the right thing to do. However, I will just chuck out that reservation at the start that apparently the best, the second best / tied first best ODI team on the planet doesn't really bother with playing ODIs anymore.
It's strange. It's all very strange how New Zealand cricket think and operate. Who the fuck knows? I don't know. What I do know, Wildcard, and I do want to get your thoughts, maybe 1 or 2 thoughts before we finish. This morning I wrote about a lot of the players on the fringes of the Blackcaps. So, for example, there's so many. That's the first thing that catches my eye, is just there's so many. And also there's the variety of situations. So you've got someone like Jeet Raval trying to get back into the Blackcaps. You've got Doug Bracewell and Adam Milne, who have been often injured. They're trying to get back into the Blackcaps. You've got Kyle Jamieson, Daryl Mitchell, Glenn Phillips, who have all played Test cricket, and they did really well in their little chance they got at Test cricket. You've got the likes of Devon Conway and Will Young, who are trying to crack into the Blackcaps various teams. And then you've got a lot of younger players trying to rise up the ranks. My question to you is, to finish here, what players on the Blackcaps fringes are you most intrigued about? Now, Devon Conway is a fairly obvious one. I'm not sure if you're going to say Devon Conway or not, but he's kind of the obvious candidate. I'd love to see Devon Conway in the Blackcaps, blah, blah, blah. But I suspect you'll have a bit more nuance and a bit more subtlety to your choice. By the Blackcaps fringes, I mean the players who are not consistently in the first 11 across the format. So I kind of view it just as a total package. And like, yeah, Lockie Ferguson's he's part of the Blackcaps being a great ODI team, but he only played a little bit of Test cricket. So you've kind of got to differentiate it. Maybe the T20, not T20 because fuck T20, but maybe the Test version of Lockie Ferguson, if you want to do it that way, or just players who are even yet to play for the Blackcaps, and then those guys who have played a couple games, they got their chance last summer. So just who on that Blackcaps fringe are you interested in the context of the Plunket Shield is coming up, and those players in that fringy Blackcaps group are going to need to really focus on performing in those opening rounds of the Plunket Shield to boost their case? Because if you're a player who just got a taste of Blackcaps cricket, well, there's a lot of other players who want that taste, so you better perform. If you're coming in fresh on the scene onto the Blackcaps fringe, well, you got to make an impact. You got to make an impression. So who in that group are you kind of going to keep a close eye on when the Plunket Shield does get underway?
Yeah, I definitely not going to say Devon Conway because it's just too obvious of an answer, and it's just, he's almost at this point, his Blackcaps potential is just getting oversaturated. Like, he's an excellent player, the dominant player as a batsman in he's top run scorer in all three formats last year, wasn't he? Like, that's astounding. But he's got to work his way into the team, and he will. He's eligible now. He'll be in squads. He'll play, whatever. I almost don't really see that as something, like, I don't feel like I have to champion him, definitely. So, boring answer, not going to say that. And also, just for those reasons, I'm just not as interested. Like, it just sort of feels a little bit more inevitable that he will play at least some games in some formats. It just doesn't really seem like there's anything to say, so therefore it doesn't really catch me. On that narrative side of things, for sure, Lockie Ferguson getting to go on the Test team is one I'd be rather invested in. I want to see that happen, but it also, like, he's locked on in the other two formats. So, I would like to come up with like an absolute bolter and just say something and chuck out a bunch of stats and whatever, but I think, just like, to be completely honest, like, there's the name that springs to mind is Colin Munro. No, the name that springs to mind, like, just as you're saying all that, that's like without going into big details and coming up with like extravagant explanations or whatever, just like going with my heart here, would comfortably be Glenn Phillips, because I think Glenn Phillips is a dude who's he has had a taste, and has he played all three formats? I'm sure he must have at this point for the Blackcaps, but not very much of anything. And he just feels like the guy who he's certainly right there on the fringe. Like, he's not an undercover player at this point, but it feels to me like he is the guy who, in any of those three formats, has potentially the most to offer. I think he's like, I'm taking Devon Conway out of this conversation because I think that's just kind of a separate thing. But Glenn Phillips seems to me like a guy who, not saying will be, but I think he has the potential. He could, like, become a world-class batsman in at least one of them 3 formats. And he's just waiting for that chance. And it feels like he's right on the bubble where he's like, he's ready, but being ready doesn't mean the opportunity's there. And he's also a lot younger than, like, how old would he be? 24, 25 or something? I was looking at the things, the contracts the other day, and like, you're doing very well to be contracted as a Blackcap if you're younger than 27 or 28. Like, the Blackcaps don't give too many young guys a go. You really do have to tally up the numbers in domestic cricket. You gotta keep your case going consistently over a few years, and you gotta just be opportunistic, like ready to go when the opportunity arises, because it's not gonna work. Like, there's not very many positions in especially when the Blackcaps are as settled right now as they are. There's not many opportunities that do come around for those guys. You really gotta take them when they come along. And more than anything, you got to be ready to be the person offered, because, like, as you say, there's a long list of guys who are competing for these kinds of spots. So, Glenn Phillips just feels to me like the guy who is there, who is ready, who is waiting, who has been doing this for a couple years now. Really come on in the last probably 2 or 3 years in particular. And I think he has an extremely high ceiling at international cricket. It's just a matter of, like, locking himself in there. So there's my answer for you, Doc. I don't know if you got something different to offer.
I definitely don't have anything else to offer, because that's the whole point. There's just so many. There's so many different, I put Glenn Phillips and Daryl Mitchell in the same category, because Daryl Mitchell also scored 50 on debut. So you got 2 batsmen who scored 50 on test debut. And that kind of just sums it all up, let alone like Kyle Jamieson, the crazy 2 months that he had. So my idea in writing about it was kind of just to lay it all out. And then I was interested in who tickled your taste buds, but it's just too many. Like we haven't even mentioned Will Young, and who knows what he's going to do this summer, let alone a lot of the other players. So very interesting indeed. And if you're listening to this, you know that the Niche Case is going to be here for you and all your cricketing needs. Not just Blackcaps, domestic cricket, women's cricket. We're here for your cricketing needs. So probably wrap it up there, Wildcard, unless you got anything you do want to say about Flying Kiwis football.
Not really. It's been a a couple years ago, this would have counted as a busy week. Like, Matt Garbutt scored his first goal for Falkenbergs. Ryan De Vries scored a last-minute winner in Ireland. A few, like, Michael Boxall captained his Minnesota team. He's sort of like the backup captain when their main captain doesn't play. He wears the armband, and there's a lot of rotation because there's a lot of double game weeks with the MLS trying to cramp everything in. But, another, like, a clean sheet as captain, snapping a losing streak, that's a pretty impressive result there. But as far as Flying Kiwis has been going recently, that's counts as a down week. Like, there's not a whole lot of not really anything to say on the transfer news. Chris Wood didn't score in the Premier League. It's just the new normal that we're at, like the different levels we're at this point now, where this suddenly this feels like the let off a bit of steam kind of week, whereas in the past this would have been something spectacular.
The spectacular, non-spectacular. I do like it. I do like it indeed.
Adjusting to the levels of excellence, isn't it?
Depending on how excellent thou wishes to be. If that makes...
There is no limit?
There's definitely no limit. The human potential is infinite.
There you go.
Rightio. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you for listening, and do support us in all the variety of ways that you can. Otherwise, having your tarting is tuned in is good enough. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Cha-cha.